Good morning and welcome. I'm Tracy Carluccio of Delaware Riverkeeper Network. This press conference is being recorded and it's also being live streamed on Facebook. I'm putting the agenda in the chat as well as the press release for today. We will have short presentations about the petitions from members of our organizations, and then we'll open up for questions from the press. Please identify in the chat what media outlet you are from, so we will be able to unmute you to ask your questions. You can also type questions into the Q&A box as we go along. This press conference is being held by our Stop LNG by Rail campaign, as we deliver 15,157 petition signatures to the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, calling for the reinstatement of the permanent ban on the transport of liquefied natural gas on the nation's railways. The longstanding ban was lifted by the Trump administration, and you're going to hear more about this from our speakers in a minute. It's important to know that communities opposed to the public safety threats and environmental impacts of transporting frack gas liquid methane by rail have come together to present the Biden administration with three specific demands in this petition. One, that Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, adopt the proposed federal rulemaking to suspend the Trump administration's 2020 rule that lifted the ban on LNG rail transport. Two, that PHMSA reinstate the permanent ban on LNG by rail. And three, that special permits for liquefied natural gas rail transport be denied before the ban is adopted, including the special permit for the proposed Gibbstown-Wyalusing LNG export project on the Delaware River. The organizations that issued and shared petitions are 350 Org Philadelphia, Berks Gas Truth, Clean Water Action, Clean Air Council, Delaware Riverkeeper Network, Earthworks, Empower New Jersey, Food and Water Watch, League of Women Voters of Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, Protect Northern PA, Rail Pollution Protection Pittsburgh, and Reclaim Philadelphia. Our organizations delivered the petitions this morning to PHMSA and the Biden administration with an urgent message for President Biden not to be influenced by the desires of the gas and oil industry to exploit the Ukraine crisis for their own profits, and to instead fulfill his pledge to put public safety, our environment, and the need to combat the climate crisis above all else by preventing LNG transport by rail. Now, I'm passing to our first speaker, Steve Hvozdovich from Clean Water Action. He will be followed by Coralie Pryde from the League of Women Voters of Delaware, Glenn Olcerst from Rail Pollution Protection Pittsburgh, Anais Peterson from Earthworks, Noah Gordon-Guterman from Food and Water Watch, and Karen Feridun from Berks Gas Truth. Take it away, Steve.
Thank you, Tracy. Good morning, everyone. As Tracy said, my name is Steve Hvozdovich. I'm the Pennsylvania Campaigns Director for Clean Water Action, a national nonprofit environmental organization with over 80,000 members in Pennsylvania, and who is in its 50th year of bringing issue expertise, solution-oriented thinking, and people power to the table in order to win strong health and environmental protections. Let's be clear that the action taken by the Trump administration in 2020 to lift the ban on LNG rail transport was nothing more than a gift to their buddies in the oil and gas industry, without regard for how it would impact our environment or the safety of our communities. The Biden administration's proposed rulemaking, more formally known as RIN 2137-AF55, to suspend the Trump administration's policy, is recognition of the real dangers posed by transporting liquefied natural gas by rail, and a move that carries a sense of urgency to occur at a moment when no one has yet acted to take advantage of the rollback under the Trump administration. Permanently suspending the Trump administration's rule eliminates any possibility of a carrier starting to use the permit if they have rail cars made to the correct specifications, or starting the investment process to retrofit rail cars within their current fleet. In turn, this gives peace of mind to communities sitting on the edge of their seats, uncertain whether their neighborhood will be transformed into a sacrifice zone by a rail route that now features bomb cars. The Biden administration's rulemaking was also an important first step toward reinstating more and stronger needed safeguards. That's why our organizations and residents all across Pennsylvania and New Jersey have called upon the Pipeline and Hazardous Safety Administration through the first part of our petition to more formally adopt the Biden administration's rulemaking. I'll now pass it off to Coralie.
Thank you, Coralie Pryde, and I'm speaking for the League of Women Voters as a member and for the other local leagues also. Special permit DOT SP 20534 represents a particularly egregious case in which PHMSA appears not to have given appropriate consideration to the dangers to communities along the rail route, nor to the environmental hazards of encouraging more extraction, transport, and use of natural gas. LNG is not proven to be safe to transport by mail. It is unacceptable to place such serious safety burdens on the environmental justice communities that are so often located along railroad tracks. In every LNG by rail project, the railroad becomes a vital link in a staggeringly expensive infrastructure project that includes drilling for natural gas, liquefying it, building centers to ship the LNG overseas. In the receiving countries, they must also invest in infrastructure to offload, process, and distribute the product internally. The high total cost of construction for these facilities means that energy companies will work to seek to lock in decades-long contracts, committing receiving countries to long-term use of fossil fuels and ignoring both safety and global warming issues. We must not allow current gas shortages and high prices to interfere with the desperate need to protect the climate from the dangerous heat-trapping effects of methane. The Energy Transport Solutions New Fortress Energy Project seems to be particularly undeserving of a permit because it is so incomplete at the time of its application. This special permit expired with no construction begun, and the application to renew it was submitted long past the stated deadline. It is also not clear that LNG will ever be produced anywhere near Wyalusing, where they plan for the liquefaction plant. It is disturbing that a special permit was granted for a plan as poorly conceived as this one. PHMSA must deny renewal of special permit DOT SP 20534, as well as all the other special permits issued by the previous administration. Thank you, and on to Glenn.
Morning. I'm Glenn Olcerst, the co-founder and general counsel of Rail Pollution Protection Pittsburgh. Until the previous administration, transporting LNG by rail was not allowed because it was not safe. Nothing has changed. However, given the political climate, the risks and hazards have substantially increased. Without regard to how it is transported, LNG itself presents a unique hazard because it is unstable. First, the methane gas is pressurized and must remain cooled to minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit. Because of the pressurization, LNG is much denser than natural gas and takes up 1/600th of the space. However, for LNG to remain liquid, any transportation vehicle must be properly equipped to maintain the low temperature. To date, LNG is most commonly transported by sea in specialized carriers, which feature specialized double-walled hulls to ensure insulation, guarantee temperature, and manage boil-off gas, an unavoidable product of transporting LNG. Moving LNG by rail has never been allowed because such a large quantity of inherently unstable LNG on a mobile rail pipeline through our nation's population centers presents an unacceptable risk in the event of a puncture or a derailment. Just 22 rail tank cars hold the equivalent energy of the Hiroshima bomb. Today, unit trains are typically 100 rail cars or more. Understand that a methane gas-fueled fire cannot be extinguished. The result is not only fire, but can also result in a catastrophic BLEV, or boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion, literally a bomb. If the fire and thermogenic explosion don't get you, a drop in the rail car's temperature and the expansion of pressure will release a vapor cloud that is heavier than oxygen, can travel many miles very quickly, and will both burn and suffocate all those in its path. Stated differently, an LNG derailment is a veritable city killer. According to the Rail Administration, Federal Rail Administration, at least one train, quote, slips off the tracks every day in the United States. They're euphemism, but these derailments are the result of substandard infrastructure and rail companies either not inspecting properly or disregarding the results of their own inspections. Because trains and rail lines cannot be protected, a failure to ban LNG by rail presents national security issues, since rail bridges can be sabotaged and the computer trained signals can be hacked in ways that result in the next 9/11, but with much graver consequences. Look, our presentation time is limited, but there's a long list of other unsafe rail failure points that we can discuss in the Q&A. For all of the reasons outlined above, we call on the PHMSA and the Biden administration to again permanently ban the transport of LNG on the nation's railways. Now I'll pass it to Anais.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Anais Peterson. I use no pronouns, and I'm the petrochemicals campaigner at Earthworks. In March, President Biden and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced plans to reduce Europe's dependence on Russian fossil fuels that included exporting additional liquefied natural gas, or LNG. The US is already operating at near full export capacity, and European gas terminals lack capacity to absorb more imports. Therefore, exporting additional 50 billion cubic meters, or BCM, of LNG to Europe each year would require new LNG export facilities, which take roughly 3 to 5 years to build and billions of dollars to finance. This proposal is directly at odds with the most recent climate mandates, which have made it abundantly clear that we need to get off of fossil fuels. The existing LNG export and extraction infrastructure in the United States is already having very real and dire impacts on residents and our climate, particularly those in the Gulf Coast, where existing facilities are concentrated. Routinely, communities of color across the Gulf bear the brunt of air and water pollution, get displaced due to industry operations, and receive inadequate hurricane relief, while fossil fuel corporations get billion-dollar tax breaks to pollute neighborhoods. Those living on the front lines of fracking have their air, water, and land poisoned, as once again, our health has been traded for a dying boom and bust industry. Liquefied natural gas is a threat to our communities starting at a hole in the ground. There is no such thing as clean, responsibly sourced, or low greenhouse gas intensity LNG. The release of methane, a greenhouse gas 86 times more powerful at warming the atmosphere than carbon dioxide, is not an accidental or infrequent part of the process. Methane releases happen at every step, and fossil fuel extraction is harming communities and our planet from extraction to transport to use. We cannot regulate fossil fuels into being low greenhouse gas intensity, and LNG is not a bridge fuel to a fossil-free future. Further investments in LNG extraction and exports do not help the Ukrainian people, but will hurt all of us. The path forward is not to simply reduce dependence on Russian fossil fuels, but to reduce and end our dependence on fossil fuels altogether. President Biden must take action towards that fossil-free future today by banning the transport of LNG by rail. And I will pass it over to Noah.
Thanks, Anais. I'm Noah Gordon-Guterman, the Stop Fracked Gas Exports Organizer with Food and Water Watch in New Jersey. Thank you so much for all the speakers that have already spoken. And I just want to reiterate where we're at right now in the project and where we're headed. The Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration has yet to make a decision on whether they will adopt Biden's proposed rule to suspend LNG by rail. And according to the most recent public statements available, they are expected to do that by June 30th. We don't have the same exact scoop on the timeline for New Fortress Energy's application for a special permit for LNG by rail, but it seems that they will be operating on a similar timeline to that of the PHMSA federal rulemaking decision. These rules are key for the viability of the Gibbstown and Wyalusing proposed LNG export project, as are permits granted by Governor Murphy of New Jersey. And in fact, despite the Wyalusing permit expiration and this PHMSA special permit, all other permits are in place for this project to move ahead. For example, the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection granted permits for a double rail loop for LNG transport by train at the Gibbstown facility, and they already have one dock of their 2 docks proposed, built for this proposed plan. With these steps in place for them to move forward and their application for a special permit for LNG by rail, we must remain vigilant on this front and in regards to the LNG federal rule. As our over 15,000 petition signatures reinstate the permit ban on LNG on the nation's railways is critical. And opposition to the Gibbstown Wyalusing project is steadily increasing. So far, 15 New Jersey resolutions, 11 Pennsylvania resolutions, and 2 Delaware resolutions have been passed, and 90 organizations have proclaimed opposition to this project. We plan to show up in numbers if PHMSA does not adopt the Biden rule or reject the special permits, and we will be mobilizing our coalition in Trenton, New Jersey on June 23rd to pressure Governor Murphy to reject permits for a second dock for the project. I know that folks in the audience probably have a lot of questions, so we're going to have time for a Q&A, and I will pass it on to Karen Feridun to conduct us in that.
Thanks so much, Noah. I'm Karen Feridun, the founder of Berks Gas Truth. And as Noah just mentioned, we're going to take your questions now. I don't see any in the Q&A or in the chat. And so if you're interested in asking a question, please raise your hand so that Peter can take you off mute. And while we're waiting to see if anyone has any questions, Noah, you just referred to the list of resolutions. Is that list available?
Yeah, I can get that list and put it in the chat.
Susan is noting the problem with the sound that seems to be coming from my computer, and we don't know why. So I've been trying to fix it, but I don't know how.
Can you hear everybody, Susan? Karen's trying to mute herself when she's not actually speaking.
I'll read the question and then mute myself because we do have one that's been added to the chat. What are your thoughts on LNG pipelines? Because that would be an alternative to the industry that would advocate for, an alternative the industry would advocate for instead of rail cars.
Well, I'll take the first stab at that. We do not support the movement of LNG by rail or by pipeline or by truck. It's all too dangerous to transport. And as has been said today, and as we make very clear in our press release, this is the moment when we must turn away as quickly as possible from fossil fuels. We do not see that there is any excuse to continue to develop any sort of natural gas, particularly liquefied natural gas. So the answer needs to be to a reframed question. What do we do instead of transporting LNG by rail? We leave it in the ground. That's basically the answer. And we're not going to be able to ever safely move it, process it, or export it, and it's not going to be able to be responsibly in any way used overseas or wherever the destination is for the liquefied natural gas. We have finished with natural gas and other fossil fuels, and we must instead develop renewables, the highest energy efficiency standards, and sustainable energy resources that are truly clean and don't make people sick, don't endanger their lives, and don't at every step of the way harm our environment. So that's sort of my answer to this, and it's also our network's answer, and we're all working towards this goal of stopping the development of liquefied natural gas and its export overseas as well as its transport.
Thanks, Tracy. Susan has a question. Can you explain the difference between the special permit for Gibbstown and the general policy on LNG by rail?
So I'll go first and maybe someone else wants to jump in, but the special permit for Gibbstown was given under the Trump administration in response to an application from Energy Transfer Solutions, which is a subsidiary of New Fortress Energy. And it was specifically for bringing liquefied natural gas from Wyalusing, Pennsylvania to Gibbstown. It's about 200 miles overland by rail and or by truck. But the PHMSA permit was covering just the rail transport. And the general rulemaking actually occurred after the special permit was issued by PHMSA to Energy Transfer Solutions. And that general rulemaking under the Trump administration was adopted by PHMSA, and it applies to all of the nation's railways. So it means any carrier can move liquefied natural gas on any of the nation's railways. So it's a much broader rule. Both of these need to be pulled back. The broad rule is what has been proposed to be suspended by the Biden rule, which we're supporting here today. A second step is supposed to be taken by the Biden administration, according to their announced schedule in the fall, to conclude the decision of PHMSA regarding any future transport of LNG by rail. And then the special permit does not have a deadline for when PHMSA will decide whether or not they will grant the request of Energy Transport Solutions to reissue or basically renew the special permit. But we think it may be around the same time as the LNG rulemaking, which according to a federal document that outlines the actions expected from the federal government should be by June 30th, as Noah said.
Does anybody else want to respond? Okay, then I will move on to the next question, which is, how concerned are you about the Ukrainian war contributing to the decision over this issue?
Anais, do you want to take a first stab at that?
Yeah, I think the number one thing about the way that Russia's invasion of the Ukraine has been framed is that the fossil fuel industry will take any crisis and use it to their advantage. They really have no interest in being in solidarity with the Ukrainian people. They have no interest in actually exporting LNG to help them. It's just another crisis. They've seen the writing on the wall in terms of the climate mandates, and they know that they need to use every possible talking point to reinforce their necessity in our lives, when really the timeline that it would take to export more LNG to Europe is the exact same timeline we need to be rapidly decarbonizing our society. We can't at the same time be saying we need to export more LNG, while at the same time saying we're going to be climate leaders. We need to be getting off fossil fuels. When it's going to take 3 to 5 years to finance and build these projects, we need to be taking those 3 to 5 years to be getting off of fossil fuels. So I think the fossil fuel industry is doing everything they can to use the war or the invasion of Ukraine to say that we need to export LNG, but it's not about helping people, it's about helping their profits.
Anybody else want to add to that? Any follow-up questions?
Coralie, it looks like you're trying to speak.
Yes, I would just add to that, and I think that some of the same considerations go for Germany, which is in a way a serious problem because they were receiving such a large amount of their energy from Russia. through the pipelines. And they are trying to give that up as a part of the war effort. But it's going to be very difficult for them because, again, they don't have any of the infrastructure in place to be receiving LNG from the U.S. or anybody else. They could build, ports could be built in other countries, and various mechanisms got to put it in there, but that the expense of putting in that infrastructure, again, would tend to lock them into things. There's some consideration that they might be able to put in certain amounts of gas, LNG import, that could at some time be transitioned over to be green hydrogen import. But this is all iffy, and it's a very sad situation there, but there's not an easy answer, like just let them import our LNG. So again, it's a difficult question, but that is LNG import is not the answer.
Yeah, I think we also need to recognize sort of the cold truth here that exporting LNG, as well as all of the other development aspects of liquefied natural gas, is for the profit of private companies. It does not benefit Americans. It doesn't benefit those countries that it goes to, because we're actually digging ourselves into a hole by continuing to develop natural gas and other fossil fuels, when, as Anais said, this is the moment before 2030 that we must reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 50%, according to the United Nations report and scientists across the globe. So we cannot let a quote unquote energy crisis that comes out of Ukraine turn into a blanket that's thrown over what is the climate crisis. And the climate crisis is the fight of our lives, is the fight of our time, and it will influence the future as well as the present, impacting the most vulnerable first. And we cannot accept that.
And Paul brings up something that Senator Warren has raised, and that is the issue that exporting LNG might raise natural gas prices here. Do you agree?
Does anyone else want to answer that? I think it's already happened, for one thing. We see natural gas prices going up. I'm sorry, I feel that we're being gouged as consumers, and the export of LNG is being used as an excuse. But does anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah,
We just say that there are a lot of factors going into it. We had never really ramped up a production of natural gas after it was slowed during the COVID crisis, and that's adding to the prices. Indeed, though, if we did start exporting a lot, it would raise the prices. Maybe if our prices were raised high enough, we would have a better understanding of why we need to get off fossil fuels in a hurry and depend on renewables that we make here and they're not under the control of the gas companies. Nice. Did you have something?
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, I mean, what we've already seen over the past couple of months is it's really about price gouging. Like fossil fuel corporations are raking in more money than they have in, I believe it's like nearly a decade. It's about them making more money, especially as the industry becomes less and less profitable, and doing it at our expense. We get the impacts of the climate crisis, and we have to pay more money for their product.
Are there any additional questions? And if not, are there any additional comments from our panel?
We'd just like to thank everybody who joined us today. We're thrilled to have a good turnout from the press, and please feel free to get in touch with us. All of our contact information is on the press release. It's in the chat a couple times there if you have any follow-up questions. And thank you very much to all of our panelists for their excellent presentations today.
Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good day.